Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Thom Hartmann, having a wonderful time of this, basically talking about Social Security and really out of control drug prices, and really had some great discussions with so many people, both callers and guests in studio, and I'm going to keep that going. Right now, I'm joined on the line by Professor Parr, the graduate program in international affairs at the New School, and serves on the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on access to medicines. And it's that panel that I want to talk about. So, Professor Parr, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on the Thom Hartmann program.
Great pleasure to be with you today.
So, I've spoken with a couple people. I spoke with Ron Pollock, who was talking with me about what the Clinton campaign and a future potential actions in the future on domestic reforms to the drug price, the out-of-control drug prices that we're seeing here in America right now. I spoke with Dean Baker after that about his new book, and also that these out-of-control drug prices are not at all, they're not a natural occurrence. It doesn't just happen. They are direct consequences of bad policy. And now I'm really happy to speak with you about, well, let me set it up one other way. And there's this huge growing movement in America that we have to do something about drug prices, that right now is the moment to do something about drug prices, both in the lame duck of Congress and in the next year in the next Congress. But there's just this kind of growing consensus, and it is especially out in America. Just citizens, folks, you ask them about drug prices, and they really want to do something about it. But what I want to talk to you about is there's also a worldwide recognition that we have to do something about access to medicines, and that high prices are a critical impediment to access to medicines around the world. And a lot, if not almost all of it, is actually emanating from the broken system that we have here in America that people here are also angry about.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think that the problem of escalating is a better word, prices of medicines is due not just, as you say, a U.S. phenomenon, but it's a worldwide problem, in part, of course, because the branded medicines are sold everywhere in the world. I mean, medicines are a global technology, and this is why we do have this fantastic progress in the 21st century and the last part of 20th century in prolonging life and in improving health conditions. But it's very uneven how that is enjoyed around the world. But we do have a problem that is common everywhere in rich countries and in poor, of these escalating prices. For example, I understand that 12 medicines approved in the U.S. for cancer in 2012 were extremely highly priced, 11 above $100,000 a year. And this, of course, is a massive strain on any health system, whether this is a cost borne by households, by insurance companies, or by public budgets, government budgets. And this is all related to the way that medical innovation, drug development is financed, because which are also governed by international trade agreements.
Professor, I want to ask if you would stick with us through this break, and on the other side of the break, really focus in on delinkage and
yes,
and what we can do about this. We're gonna take a quick break here, and on the other side, we're going to return with the discussion of an international movement to switch to a more sensible, civilized structure for drug prices and creation of drugs. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann program. I'm Alex Lawson, and we will be right back. Welcome back. to the Thom Hartmann program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Thom, and I am extremely fortunate right now to be speaking with Professor Sakiko Fukuda Parr, who is a professor at the graduate program in international affairs at the New School and serves on the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on access to medicine. Professor, thank you so much for sticking with us through that break.
It's a pleasure to be with you today.
So I'm going to give a little bit of the, I want to get into delinkage and what we can do, but I want to just tell our listeners who are really informed on this stuff and understand the importance of something like this panel. But I want everyone to understand that the U.S. really did not want this panel to exist. They did not want the report to happen. They did not want the panel to come together. And when it did come together, they put out very, very nasty statement from the, I want to read it. The State Department of the U.S. This is a panel focused on getting access to medicines, vital and life-saving medicines around the world. And the U.S. State Department of the Obama administration said, put out this statement: U.S. disappointed over fundamentally flawed report of the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on access to medicines. I mean, they really tried to stop it from even happening. And then when they couldn't, you know, they tried to condemn it. But to me, that just shows that, you know, this is a movement that's actually kind of coming together all around the world right now. Looking at the way that health is used, it's restricted for profit. People's health is held above them so that, you know, a drug corporation executive can buy yet another yacht. I don't want to go too much into the problems because we spent a lot of time on that. I want to go to the solutions, and I know that you are an expert on. There are other ways of doing things. So specifically, I touched on it a little bit with Dean Baker, this concept of delinkage. Can you talk a little bit about what that is? And is that something that the panel thinks is a path forward?
Yes. This is actually one of our central recommendations. So we have three areas of recommendations. First, to do with this new model of incentivizing research and development, or delinkage. The others, by the way, have to do with the way that intellectual property laws are embedded in trade agreements, and governance, accountability, and transparency. So this idea of delinking, meaning delinking the financing of research and development in charging high prices for branded medicines, and finding new incentives for financing R&D is what we propose as the way forward for finding solutions to this perennial and increasing growing gap between gaps in innovation and access. And delinkage essentially would involve finding push-pull pooling collaborative research mechanisms. So push would be like upfront grants, public financing. Pull would be offering financial rewards or prizes, you know, tax breaks, other incentives to finance. Pooling would be patents could be pooled and made available for researchers in a collaborative way. And then this could be extended to other types of general open research platforms. And so these are the kinds of mechanisms that would be alternatives to conventional patents for creating incentives to invest in medicines. Because as long as you are basically giving the incentive of patents monopolies to corporations as the way that they can finance research and development, they will, of course, charge high prices. So high prices are fundamentally linked to patents. And once generics kick in fact, you do see, empirically lower prices. So there are a number of directions in which this can move. But what I think at the international level, we're talking about having some kind of a consensus. And I think that whenever you need to make change, the first step in making social change has to do with changing minds. Mm-hmm. And the most important thing is that we recognize globally, internationally, that these new models are a way to go. And you mentioned the U.S. State Department statement on our report in very colorful terms. But I have to point out that the same U.S. government also signed a declaration with respect to AMR, antimicrobial resistance, that the way forward for developing new drugs in this field, which has not produced enough incentives for investment, would be delinkage. Mm-hmm. So, it's hard to know what the U.S. actually is opposed to, because they're obviously not opposed to delinkage when it comes to creating incentives for investing in new antibiotics.
And I think, there's a lot in what you talked about, and it is seemingly a very complicated topic. But I like to try to break things down just for my own self. I actually won't accept as a goal or a final spot anything less than delinkage. There's no way that we can actually keep the current setup that will lead to anything but high drug prices time and time again. And there's two things there. The high drug prices are basically like a tax on sick people who need the medicines, and that's how they're funding the research, or that's at least what pharmaceutical corporations say. And in fact, it's just funding their yachts and their vacations and their golden helicopters. But because the public pays so much to develop research and development and the basic science. And so I come at it from that angle a lot. But I also actually understand that there is this public health angle that is less about taking on the financialization and the Wall Street type actions. But it's actually just, there is no way that our current system can deal with the coming public health challenges, which have the potential to actually reverse much of the gains that humanity has made, and antimicrobial resistance being the primary one. In fact, our system as it is set up right now leads in many cases directly to multiply drug resistant strains of all sorts of things, because for a variety of reasons, but sometimes it's to incentivize just using either one sort of antibiotic over and over and over again, which, you saw somewhat of that in multiply drug-resistant tuberculosis coming out of Russian prisons, where, you have the selective pressure. You also have an incentive sometimes to just switch to the newest, most hyped drug, because that's the pharmaceutical corporations. They're paying for the golf tournaments and the nice little cups and stuff. If you can't tell, I actually worked in outreach clinics before, so I have very strong opinions about this stuff, because we can't address some of these coming challenges with our current system. And delinkage doesn't need to fully replace either, right? I mean, you can go side by side for a while. Senator Bernie Sanders has put in a bill in the Senate for many years that is a delinkage. It's the prize fund funding for HIV medicines. So, I mean, like, it's not like we need to completely disrupt the entire system, although I would be in favor of that. We can also progressively move in a direction that we can have these variety of incentives. Does that sound about right?
I think so. I would agree with you. The point is that there are many priorities that are not being met, like AMR, like antibiotics that you mentioned, which I would also agree with, like priority number one. And since there is an awful lot of medical research that needs to be done, there is absolutely no reason why the two systems cannot coexist. On the other hand, this kind of publicly incentivized, publicly created incentives have to target certain global priorities. And that is why we are proposing that as a concrete step to move forward on this, we need to start negotiating a consensus on what those priorities are. And that is why, the UN can actually help achieve that international consensus by starting discussions and negotiations over those priorities. And that is why we are putting in this recommendation for a global R&D treaty, and as a first step to start negotiating principles for a code of principles for biomedical R&D, because I think the other issue is that at the moment, what is publicly funded and what is privately funded is kind of all mixed together. Because what you have is an awful lot of public funding, which accounts for about 30% of all R&D, that goes into corporate R&D that actually manufactures the medicine at the end of the road. But they are not paying adequately for this the public funding that they actually received, and
which is of huge value to these corporations.
Well, exactly.
Huge, billions of dollars.
Exactly.
So, Professor, we only have a little bit of time here on this segment. I wish I could just keep talking about this, and I want to actually keep this discussion going, because I think that in order to change minds, to change the narrative that pharma has bought and paid for in this country, we will need to act in global solidarity and understand that we are exporting a broken system around the world. It's hurting us and it's hurting everyone. And it's in solidarity that we can actually fight back. If our listeners are interested in learning more about this, is there a website that they can go to learn about the panel, yes. The coming treaty?
Yes. You can Google UNSG access to medicines.
Okay. And we're going to put that up on the YouTube video, and we'll tweet that out. Professor, thank you so much for joining us here. And I'm hoping that we can keep this conversation going in multiple venues, and we will be able to actually make some progress both domestically on high drug prices and around the globe when people realize that we have to do that in tandem. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann program. I'm Alex Lawson, sitting in for Thom Hartmann, and we will be right back.